I think Call of Duty has slipped in, potentially, the first reveal of what Black Ops 6's new map for Call of Duty Warzone is going to be. Now, this sounds super far afield and it sounds very, very far-fetched, so I'm going to need you to stick with me. But earlier today, a friend of mine, Geeky Pastimes, posted an image on Twitter and said that this was in the reveal, but that it looks far too detailed. So I decided to find the timestamp for myself directly off of Call of Duty Black Ops 6's segment and have a look at this image in a bit more detail by super enhancing it in Photoshop frame by frame and having a gander. And I know this sounds far-fetched and I know this sounds far afield, but I genuinely do believe that this image right here is your first look at the brand new Warzone map potentially coming to Black Ops 6. And there's a couple of reasons for this, and we're going to talk about in this video today to explain why this isn't as much of a stretch as it potentially sounds, and we'll go into some detail. Now, to start with, the developers have been entirely adamant through various social channels like Charlie Intel and Modern Warzone that VERDANSK isn't returning. They've said this a number of times, and whilst I do think it will come back at some point, we don't know if there is a timeline for that. And with Call of Duty Black Ops 6 featuring Omni Movement, which is a brand new movement system, it's very likely that the entire map design process for a new Warzone map to feature this movement is going to have to be a little bit different to the traditional designs that we've seen so far. We're going to need more options for variety of gameplay that factor in the ability to dive in all directions and give people different height advantages in the game. So it wouldn't be a huge surprise to say that the map coming for 2024 would in fact be brand new in itself. And if you just watch this in the trailer, you would assume that they were showing a Hellfire missile in a multiplayer map. But the missile in question in this video isn't a Hellfire missile, it's a cruise missile because there are 4 fins on it instead of 3, which is clearly shown in the Hellfire missile tablet, and it also appears to be an entirely separate map from the Hellfire missile that was called in the trailer. The lighting looks entirely different and it just looks like a separate place in terms of color scheme. But the biggest reason I think this is the Warzone map is 2 things. One, there appears to be assets from existing Warzone maps already within this screenshot, however blurry they may be. And 2, these are obviously designed POIs. These are POIs that have been specifically and meticulously designed to work in certain ways and show elements of advanced map design for something akin to Warzone. So the first one I want to point out is that we clearly have a radio tower on the left-hand side, and we also appearingly have an archway akin to the one that already exists on Urzikstan right now. Yes, they are super blurry, but it's kind of obvious what they are. But if you look at these images frame by frame, there are some very obvious choices in this trailer that appear to show obvious map design. The first one I want to point out is the structure below, which appears to show a primary building with 2 sets of bridges next to it. And the 2 sets of bridges are very deliberately posed at different heights to potentially allow people to fight each other across the bridges with a central POI in the middle. You have further bridges in the background which also appear to be crossings, and you also have a very built-up segment of a town area and then an almost independent island, as well as a boat in the middle of the water. The bridges to me and that centralized building on that right-hand side are a point of interest. That is a transition point, that is a way from getting to A to B. You can even see a Rebirth Island-style water tower on this centralized island as well. So there are very obvious POIs at work here, and there are very obvious centralized build-up points. To the bottom left, there appears to be something that resembles a town, as well as something slightly smaller scale on the top right of the map that's separated by that body of water, which we've come accustomed to in most of our Warzone maps at this point in time. But also, the general terrain and surroundings of pretty much everything you're seeing here is multi-height leveled, and this is something that is a feature of pretty much every single Warzone map. It doesn't matter if you're in the open or in a wide open space, Warzone very deliberately designs up and down playing fields of small hills and slightly larger hills to provide different types of traversal options as well as different types of cover options. And there appears to just be a litany of those all across what we're seeing in this small frame or small set of images or video loop. It really does feel to me that this is far too detailed for a multiplayer map, even though this was appearing in the multiplayer segment before Stephanie asked if she could talk about Warzone yet, which feels very much on the nose. And it also feels too specifically detailed for campaigns as well. Campaigns, in many regards, despite Call of Duty going for something a bit more open world, have a more linear feel to them. They don't necessarily have to think about specified map design and how that map design works for the individual player against other players. But for me, there are essences of that all over this. A water tower, radio towers, a centralized building, a deliberate reason of having two separate bridges at two separate heights. In the background, in the very distance, right up on the water's edge, there are a series of miniature islands that are spaced out amongst each other, similar to some of the smaller islands that we saw on the edge of Al Mazrah. Hell, if you wanted to go super stretch far, you could even argue that that yacht in the middle of the water resembles some of the boats that we've seen on Rebirth Island, or potentially even something akin to something like Hijacked from Black Ops. That's a bit more far-fetched, I know, but this just doesn't sit with me well. This whole situation of these few scenes and frames just feel like they have zero context to them in relation to the rest of the reveal, and I do genuinely believe that these are far too detailed landscapes and far too detailed in terms of map design to resemble anything that you would possibly play in the campaign. And generally speaking, the exteriors of multiplayer maps in Call of Duty games don't tend to be this detailed either. I think this was a short snippet frame that they expected most people to miss, and I think it's something that they anticipated most people wouldn't recognize. But from somebody who's played pretty much all of the Call of Duty maps at this point, all of the Warzone maps that I could possibly think of, and as somebody who's very much in tune with the design of how Call of Duty likes to design their Warzone maps, I genuinely believe this could be the next one. Before Urzikstan released, I said the biggest reaction we would see going from Caldera and Al Mazrah to a new map would probably be a focus on more density, because that's something that people missed from the Verdansk era, and whilst Al Mazrah had areas of density, the majority of the map felt very sparse. And Urzikstan, in many respects, is a highly dense building map. And I feel as though the reaction to Urzikstan as a map that's been semi-successful but not super popular would be a bit more over the top, something that feels a little bit more extravagant and plays into the hand of the new Omni movement system. I'm talking more detailed POIs, I'm talking more places to do cool shit like dive off of bridges, dive off of towers, dive off of structures and hillsides, and effectively a map that is designed purposefully to make Warzone action-packed in a similar vein to how Verdansk was action-packed. The critical bonus to something like the Omni movement system is that it's going to create moments within the Warzone gameplay loop that are unique to Warzone, similar to how Battlefield back in the day had only in Battlefield moments that were just unique things that could only occur in that game. And we saw that in the early days of Verdansk. There were just cool things that you could do in Warzone that just weren't achievable elsewhere. And I truly feel as though the new map that will be for Warzone, or the map that releases for Warzone, is heavily going to play into the idea of this action cinema blockbuster feel, the idea of you being in some sort of action film akin to the campaign. I really feel as though they're going to focus on having various types of elevation and deliberately creating areas, POIs, and structures that hand into the movement system and allow players to do cool and interesting things with the gameplay loop of Warzone that they wouldn't have seen before. So things like having spread out islands across a small segment of the map, having bridges at different heights, having a large structured building that you could dive off of, water towers, having bodies of water for players to interact with around larger structures of buildings that we're all seeing in this image, as still and as blurry as it is, feels like what we might see for the new Warzone map. The final thing of note, which is probably the largest stretch that I haven't really put much emphasis on just because I think like it might be a bit much, is that we still don't know what the radar image is in the background of the Frank Woods cutscene, and there are potentially some resemblances or similarities to what could be a future Warzone map, and this is very obviously some sort of underwater radar system like a submarine or something of that demeanor that we have seen on Rebirth Island. It just feels like there has been a hint towards Warzone. And I know that I've done the YouTuber curse of taking a 3-second clip and talking about it for 10 minutes. But you gotta bear with me, and if you think I'm even remotely right, I would like to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comment section below. As always, folks, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.